sunny London. I'm Claire Rose and this is the live London tour with Stephen Liddell. If you're watching, feel free to give us a thumbs up. I've done this on the business page just so that I can see people's comments. So if you have a comment or a question while we do our tour, then please do feel free just to write underneath and I should see it. I'm not giving the tour. I'm here outside St Paul's over here, as you can see. We're due to start our tour. And the reason that we're doing this is that Stephen and I are both part of the 3 million people excluded from any government help during lockdown. So that's no furlough, no self-employment grant, no universal credit, job seekers allowance. Stephen runs a tourist business called Ye Old England Tours, Oldie England Tours with an E on the end of it. And he's been unable to work because he's been in shielding, that's it. He's been shielding since March. So I'm very lucky today. We have a very long microphone between Stephen and I. So we are social distancing. That's why I don't have a mask on at the moment. The purpose of this tour is therefore to raise a little bit money towards Stephen to reinvent his business again after lockdown. He's got an incredible wealth and amount of knowledge, I have to say already. Even just walking to the starting point, he's told me so much history about this area already. So his company is Ye Old England Tours. He will be talking to the Rotherhithe and Bermondsey Local History Society at the end of this month, but I couldn't wait that long, so I thought I'd have a private tour, but it's not really private because you guys are here as well. So I'm going to plug him in and then hopefully you'll be able to hear him, and I'll switch the camera around. You won't be able to hear me anymore, thank goodness, or my voice. Okay, here we go.
Hi everyone, so today we're going to walk from St Paul's Cathedral and we're going to go through Little Britain and we'll go through Smithfield. We're in the very heart of the City of London, so it isn't normally where tourists come apart from St Paul's itself and the Tower of London, which is about a mile away. So we'll get to see some parts of London hopefully that you never get to see. And if you were to look behind us first of all, before we go to St Paul's, you can see down the main road there that takes you down to Fleet Street and Ludgate Circus. And if you were to carry on walking down there after about 2.5 miles, it'll get you to Trafalgar Square. But of course the main thing here is St Paul's Cathedral. And St Paul's is the cathedral for the City of London. Everybody knows Westminster Abbey, which is where the Queen gets coronated, but St Paul's is just for the city, and the city is 1 square mile as opposed to London itself, which is about 650 square kilometres. This is where Princess Diana had her funeral, but most people have their services at Westminster. Winston Churchill also had his funeral here. It's one of the highest points in the City of London, because London, before the Romans came, it was generally a big swamp. It was very level, and the reason that London's here at all is that it was an easy way for the Romans to cross the River Thames, but this is one of the few areas of solid ground. And right underneath the dome of St Paul's, you have the resting places of Lord Nelson from Nelson's column fame, and of course he died at the Battle of Trafalgar, and Nelson had quite a big ego for a man of his time, and he didn't want to be buried in Westminster because as we see, Big Ben is falling over, and he had faith in St Paul's being on solid ground, and he didn't want to be forgotten about if anything happened to Westminster Abbey, so he's buried right underneath the dome of St Paul's Cathedral along with a few other people. What we'll do, we'll walk along and I'll tell you stuff as we go along, and if you have any questions, if I can't answer them or I don't hear them obviously, I'll go back to there.
I can tell you them.
Yes, and I'll answer them online when we finish in the evening. So if we'll head off this way.
Hopefully they won't get motion sickness.
That's right. So there's been several St Paul's cathedrals here. The other previous ones were destroyed by fires, most notably the Great Fire of London. This one, of course, was targeted by the Luftwaffe in the Second World War, and it's kind of ironic that the other buildings on this site were destroyed by great fires, whereas Hitler deliberately targeted the building with bombs to set it on fire, and it failed. But they had a whole load of men on the top with sandbags, and any incendiary bombs that landed, they tried to kick off. And the dome of St Paul's itself is about a centimetre and a half smaller than St. Peter's in the Vatican in Rome, because Sir Christopher Wren built it to be respectful to the Pope and to the church in Vatican City. So here, as we're going, you can see the splendid old archway, and this has only been here for a few years, although obviously it's really old. And this used to be the archway that was further down Fleet Street, and this was a ceremonial divide between the City of London and the City of Westminster. But back in the Victorian times, it became necessary to widen the streets because of all the traffic from the horse and carts and the onset of kind of vehicles. So it's actually taken away to a house in North London that was in the private garden.
Dave says, is that Temple Bar?
It used to be right next to the Temple, yes. So it was right next to what's now the Bank of England pub. So you had Lincoln's Inn Field on the one side and Temple on the other side. And if we go through here, it's just by chance that it perfectly fits the gap. So here we go, we're going into Paternoster Square.
Where the First Dates restaurant is, Steve.
That's right, sorry. And you can see this is normally when there's no virus going on, this square is kind of full of sporting and cultural things. You have galleries and things of that nature. But the main statue that you see here is a memorial to the Blitz, which was London's second great fire of London, they call it. And it's very similar to the monument. That's a monument that remembers the actual great fire. So it's meant to look identical. You have some great views. All these buildings here are all to do with the clergy. And some of the streets around here are where the staff of St. Paul's live and work. You can actually go right to the top of St. Paul's. And of course, where you can just see some people walking around, that's inside, that is the Whispering Gallery. And it's, if you whisper into the stone, somebody 180 degrees opposite can hear what you're saying. It's very similar to the Senate building, I think the Capitol building in America, where I think it was President Jackson. He would pretend he was asleep so that he could overhear the plans of his political opponents. So here you can see a bit of modern art, and this remembers the time when it was this area used to be very connected to the meat market. We'll see later on. So the City of London, there isn't many things for the tourists to do, and they are very rich, the City of London. They get all their money from the insurances and the banks. They do try to jazz it up from time to time with bits of modern art, and sometimes it fits in and sometimes it doesn't. So we're just going to get out of this kind of shopping arcade area. You'll see that all the buildings here are really super modern, and that's because this area is totally flattened in the Blitz. Later on we'll go and visit a church which is left in ruins from 1940. You have a look there, you get a quirky view of St. Paul's.
Which one is
And that door on the left where the black shutter is next to the little boy, that was the secret house for Mission Impossible in the last Mission Impossible film with Tom Cruise and Simon Pegg. That's where they tied up the prisoners and did all their kind of stuff. It's normally very busy around here. If you come on a Sunday, it's empty, but work days it should be packed out. But of course there's nobody in the City of London, so if any of you happen to want to do a real live tour, you can see social distancing isn't a big problem. So we're right on the western side of the City of London, and if these buildings weren't here, you'd be able to see all the way down to Bank and the heart of London. This is the Roman part of London originally. It was about 1 mile. It takes about 20 minutes to walk all the way across. We're going to go down here. Let's not get stuck on the tree. So we'll just stop by the traffic lights if people need to not get sick. You can see there some of the famous churches, and you got the old tower behind it. We call it the Death Star or the walkie-talkie. So we'll cross over here. If you have a look up there, you'll see some more modern art of some angels, and you'll see that they're all kind of sitting and kind of pausing in contemplation. and it's a bit of modern art. It's meant to signify that no matter how busy you are, even in the City of London, when everybody's making loads of money and going from meeting to meeting, you should always find some time just to sit by yourself and have a think about the things that are more important in life than money.
Oh. Easy to say when you're not excluded.
Yeah, that's right. And I can say it's not having any money, that I have a lot of time to think about that. So we'll just cross over here. So we're going to head off kind of towards the Museum of London, but that's not where we're going to. So this is St Martin's Le Grand Street. In the old days there used to be a French church along here, and before that there used to be a priory of some sort. But all of these buildings have all mostly been repaired after the Second World War.
Is this a very religious area? There's lots of priories in here.
Yes, because it was right on the outskirts of town. Generally the monks and religious people would want to be away from temptation. So you'll get lots of places like Whitechapel, and you got the big priory at Aldgate. They're always on the edge of London because they didn't want to be mixing with all the temptations of drunken ladies and that sort of thing. They'd be hard pressed to find any temptations in London this kind of summer. See that even the street is called Angel Street. So we'll just cross over here for a bit more of London art. We're going to head off towards the Blue Box, which I'll tell you about when we get there. On the right you've got a place called Gresham Street, and that's one of the main streets in the old City of London, and that goes all the way past the Guildhall. If you have a look at this a moment. So here is an old Victorian post box. You can tell how old it is by the insignia. Obviously you got a V there for Victoria, whereas we all have ER2 for Queen Elizabeth, and you get quite a lot of Georges. But this has only been here. It wasn't the original place, but the reason it's here is that this is where the old original Great Post Office was. So the main post office for London was here for over a century, both in one building and on the building over the road. So this is kind of in commemoration of that. But all the post boxes in the old days were generally green. It's only more recent times that they've been red. You'll see some in Windsor as well. Ones where you got kind of nice areas, I suppose. But yeah, Gresham Street is where one of the main corporate streets of London. It goes right past the Guildhall, and that's where the City of London Corporation are, and they are the people who run the city. And you've also got Lloyd's Bank and a lot of big companies like that. And it's named after Gresham was actually a merchant in the Tudor times. He was all into banking and trade. That's why he's been honoured in that way. As we go along you'll see all these blue plaques on the wall, and they're all for buildings or institutes that used to be here, but most of them were destroyed in the Victorian times just for modernisation purposes or by the war. Here's another one, a French church. This was destroyed or levelled to create the new post office building in the Victorian times. If you have a look on the horizon, you can see that I call it a monstrosity, the Barbican, and that was a big 1960 development. That part of London was completely wiped out by the Luftwaffe, and in its time it was a very trendy place to be. So here we are. Some of you might recognise this sort of thing. This is an original police public call box, and anybody who's watched Doctor Who will be aware of what it's meant to be. They're no longer used, but back in the old days you'd actually just open that up and there'd be a telephone in. So normally it would be a police officer, but if you were passing by, if somebody was being mugged or having a heart attack or whatever, you could pick it up and it would be connected to your local station. And you got the orange light, which of course flashes when you're going to go off the Gallifrey. So just before we go in, I'll just tell, lots of people might know this, but these trees here, they're all over central London, and they're called London plane trees, and they generally only grow between London and Paris. They need to be at a certain latitude. And if you have a look, you've got the smooth patches of bark and very rough patches of bark, and these were all planted in Victorian and Georgian times, and the bark is very good at absorbing pollution. It takes in all the carbon in the old days from fires and factories, but now it still works for cars and airplanes. And when the bark is full of carbon, it falls off, and then it goes into the soil and it rots away, and it locks in all of the carbon and poisons, and it's a way to make the air in London cleaner than what it naturally would be. And there's thousands of them everywhere, and they were planted specifically for that reason. And the bits that are kind of smooth now, if you come back in a year's time, they'll be all kind of jagged and full of bark, and the old bark will have fallen off and they'll be smooth. It's a constant process. Although when you have a hot summer like today, often you'll get whacked on the head by a foot of it. So now we're entering Postman's Park, and this is one of over 100 little parks in the City of London, and most of the parks are either old churchyards or they're places that were destroyed in the Blitz or the Great Fire of London. And this one's called Postman's Park, obviously, because it's right next to the old General Post Office. This is a Presbyterian church, and it might be impossible to see, but we'll have a look anyway. Oh, you can just about see him. Can you see the stained glass window? You can see a figure standing with the blue sky behind him. That's not Jesus, that is John Wesley, the man who invented Methodism. And he used to live, or he studied at the house near here. He was a very revolutionary in religious terms, and he ended up getting banned from most of the churches. And this is one of the places he would come and preach to. And he actually converted, or he had an encounter with the Holy Spirit about 200 metres from here near the London Museum. So this is just a little commemoration, even though it isn't a Methodist church. And we'll go and see his house in a little while. All of these parks are all made so that city workers can have somewhere quiet to kind of chill out and eat lunches. Yeah, and they change all the flowers kind of on a seasonal basis. Which way shall we go? Is it just for the filming? It's better in the shade, isn't it? So this is called the Victorian Memorial of Heroic Self-Sacrifice. And until the Victorian times, generally people would only pay any attention to you if you were rich or powerful. So if you were an aristocrat or a general, or you had done something heroic. But during the Victorian periods, people became aware of the value of everyday people. Things like the Crimean War were the first wars where soldiers were reported upon if they were just privates rather than majors or colonels. And all of these people here, they all died trying to save or successfully saving the lives of others. So you get people who climbed onto the frozen rivers or ponds, and they fell through the ice trying to rescue a child, and the child was saved, but then they died by falling through the ice. There's 40 or 50 of them here, and we can have a look closely at some of the tiles. This one is not my favourite one, but it's one that I've researched quite a bit. Alice lived near Borough Market, and a place called, on Union Street near Crossbones Cemetery, which is another interesting place to go to. And she died having thrown out 3 of her family children out of a burning building, but she died from smoke inhalation shortly afterwards, and that was the end of her. And so all of the people around here, they've all kind of suffered similarly. These poor guys were killed rescuing men from poison gas. A lot of them you can have a look up on Wikipedia, but if you live in London, it's well worth coming down. If you come early in the morning or evening, there won't be anybody here.
Which is the one that got in contact with us?
Some of them are really young, like he's 16. There's at least one little boy who's about 7. There's one, he's 10. Drowned attempting to save the life of his brother after he himself had just been rescued. So don't come here if you're kind of feeling sad, because it might make you feel sadder. Here's one that was just put up 10 years ago, but for some reason the people who run this kind of facility, they decided they didn't want to add any more names. They wanted to keep it as a historic monument.
There's 2 spaces.
Yeah, they could add a lot of more people along, couldn't they? But I guess it's up to them. This is it, done by Mr. Watts. such a nice thing to remember people who died doing good deeds, isn't it? Because normally you never hear about that sort of thing. Where we're walking, even though it's a park, we're actually walking on lots of burials. You'll see some of the tombstones have been hidden away behind the trees, but that's just done so that we can enjoy it as a park. But you'll see these London plane trees everywhere that we go. So once we get out of here, we're kind of on the edge of what's called Little Britain. It's got nothing to do with the TV show. Nobody's quite sure why it's called Little Britain. People say lots of things, but I don't believe any of them. This is the back of St Bart's. I'll tell you more about St Bart's later on. We'll go around the front, but this is the modern wing, but this is one of the oldest hospitals in the world. So we're going to cross over here. Got a great view of St Paul's, haven't you? Here's an interesting statue. Well, interesting if you're kind of a bit nerdy like we are. If you have a look, we go up closer, you can see that he's got a pen in his hand and he's writing a letter out. And he is the man who kind of invented the modern postal service. There should be a little dedication to him on the front or the back. There you go, Mr. Rowland Hill. I think his house was in Bloomsbury, and he might also have lived in in Hampstead. But this is the site of the General Post Office. And this street also was the first test of Marconi's wireless telegraph. He had a guy on the roof of the post office, and then 300 metres away they had a receiver, and they tapped out something like Morse code, and it was picked up at the other building, and Marconi proved that kind of radiography or radio telemetry was a viable form of communication. Which is handy because that's the BT building even now, so it's still British Telecom even 130 years later. So coming to one of my favourite ruins in London. There's actually quite a lot of ruins in London, but people don't know where to look. But this one's quite an easy one to find, given that you're right underneath St Paul's. So this is the former church of St Christchurch Greyfriars, and when it was made, this isn't the original building. The other one was destroyed in the Great Fire of London, but the medieval church was the second largest church in London. It had a monastery attached, and it had a giant library. The man who kind of founded it or sponsored it was a great believer in kind of spending his money on religious institutions, so it was a very important place to be. And sadly this was destroyed on the 29th of December in 1940, the very same day or night that the Luftwaffe targeted St Paul's. They wiped out all of this place, and this church is one of the buildings that was wiped out. But if you see how little there is of it now, you can imagine how the rest of London looked like in the 1940s. And the steeple itself was reconstructed. It was taken down. It did survive slightly, but they took it down and rebuilt it from scratch to make sure it wouldn't fall over again. And it's now a kind of a modern office block inside, or modern as you can be in a 350-year-old building. And if you have a look, you've got all these kind of climbing roses and different plants. And these are to represent where the columns of the church used to be. And it's a bit hard to see now because we're well into summer, but the flowers are all planted where the pews were, and you've still got the central element of the nave. Quite a few famous important people were buried here. There's royalty from Scotland and France and all sorts of other things. And if you come at night time, it's all lit up. They've got spotlights, so it's a really interesting place to come. And the gardens, all the gardens are tended by the City of London Corporation. That's one of the things that they try to spend their money on because they're rolling in it. If I keep saying that, they're not going to let me come here anymore. But they're always changing. If you come in the autumn or in the spring, you'll have a totally different flower selection. I think they're doing some work now because it's all gated off on the side. But originally, London wasn't a big city like it is today. It was all a collection of villages. Wherever you see a church, or now a tube station, they were all separate entities. London itself was very small, and it's grown together over 100 or 200 little places. This little bit of modern art came up about 2 years ago. This is commemorate a kind of a religious boys' school and a church school. It was moved to Kent, I think it was, about 1908 or so. But this is all part of, before there was social services and government helping people. It was all, oh, there you go, 1902. I was wrong by 6 years. I haven't been here since February, so I'm not perfect. But all of the social work was done by the church or the bodies of the church. So a lot of the homes, such as they were for children or for helping the poor, were all the responsibility of the church. Sadly, this wall actually was a little, went further out, but it was pulled down in the 1960s when they wanted to widen the roads, so the church is even more of a ruin than what it was after the Second World War. This isn't the original building, but this is on the site and in the style of the old vestry, with the kind of Georgian style buildings. This is the old cemetery, again, just like in Postman's Park. So you got a little sign there, you can see how it was destroyed. Generally speaking, though, they pull down the headstones after 3 or 4 generations once there's nobody alive left to kind of mourn the person who's buried there. And in the Victorian times, they had a big crisis of dead bodies and diseases. So it actually, at one point, they stopped burying people in the City of London because they realised it was very unhygienic, especially the way they would squash people into into cemeteries. So this is actually the beginning of the A40 road, and the road we were on with the post office was actually the very southern end of the A1 that would take you all the way to Edinburgh. So we're right in the middle of London. So we're just going to go down to where Newgate was, and everyone will know that London used to be surrounded by a Roman wall, and there's still places that you can find it up to about 39 feet tall, or about 13 metres. You'll see a lot like these obviously have St Greyfriars Monastery, so you can see it ties in with King Henry VIII when he had his issues with the Pope and the Catholic Church, and he had a little reorganisation going on. This big building on the left that's just curving round, that is the edge of the Old Bailey, which is one of the oldest courts in the world. Still used often today. When I do tours, you see all the TV people there, and lots of mobs. I was here in the summertime, and everybody was shouting one side or the other for Tommy Robinson, and you get terrorists that come here, or serial killers. It's where the worst of the worst come. Originally, this road, there was a gate here. It's called Newgate because it wasn't one of the original Roman gates. It was built later when the road system developed, and then they needed to squeeze more people out. They couldn't all go through Ludgate, which is just round the corner. We're coming up to a very nice pub, the Viaduct Tavern.
You can stop here if you like, I'm joking.
Yeah. So if you have a quick look in, you can see it. So this is what's called the Gin Palace, and it's the only surviving gin palace within the borders of the City of London, and normally it's full of stockbrokers and people of that type. It's also one of the most haunted pubs, And one of the paintings, it's had lots of violence in here. One of the paintings on the back has actually got a bayonet hole from some soldiers having a fight. And somebody was murdered once when the commanding officer cheated at poker, and the soldiers found out about it, and obviously they weren't happy about losing their wages. And you see that we're right next to the court, and down here it's one of the most haunted pubs, but it said there's well, there are some, they keep beer there now, but there's something that could be prison cells at the bottom of the pub. And over here you got the Newgate Church, and people used to come here the night before they were going to be executed, and in the old days they'd be executed in the street, and later on they'd be executed in the church. But the bell used to ring here. The Newgate bell is very famous, and it would toll when it was time for you to repent and get ready to be executed. And there were so many people that would come and watch the public executions, they had to build a tunnel from the church to the pub so that the priests could get under and give the last rites or whatever. I'm not into kind of executions and things, so I don't know all of it. But he used to have to come underground because he couldn't get through the crowds of people, and even a murderer kind of deserved to be blessed before he went to be executed. And if you have a look through the door, you might be able to see a booze. Can you see a booze? If you come along this way, you can just see that just behind the toilet. So it was such a bad pub that the landlady didn't trust the bar staff with money, and there were so many people. It would be like going to a drive-in movie. You'd come here, have your food and drink, and cheer on the executions. And so what you'd do, you'd go to that booth and you'd exchange money for kind of wooden tokens, and then with your wooden tokens you could get your drinks. And that was a way so that the managers didn't trust the barkeepers to kind of look after the money. So you get your wooden bits, and then when you want a pint you'd give the wooden bit, and then you get your beer back, and there was no risk of anybody stealing your money. So we're going to go down here. This is a nice little area. You see the old alcove there with the beakers. The beakers have kind of been removed at the moment, I think, for the COVID virus. That's an old water point. A lot of the water around here was very dirty from all the centuries of executions and things, but that was one of the public works to improve the situation. It's a very beautiful church in there. Apart from the public garden that you can see around the side, there's an old military cemetery as well. If you have a look, we can maybe cross over the road so you can have a look properly closer. There's so much to see around in the Smithfields area. See, this is called the Watch House. And again, it was destroyed around the time St Paul's was being attacked. And this watch house, one of the things that used to happen, London had a big problem. There was too many people and not enough sites for burials. So every few years, they would end up having to dig up coffins, and they would find when they would dig up the coffins, and they would dig the holes deeper so they could rebury people further, more than 6 feet down. But they would open up the coffins from time to time, and one in so many people, 10 or 15 people, they'd find scratch marks inside the coffins, meaning that the people had been buried alive. And sometimes it was just that they were drunk or they were in a coma, or people just didn't care very much generally. So the rich people, what you'd have a kind of a rope or a kind of a cord attached inside your coffin. So if you woke up and you had been buried alive, you'd pull the rope, and above the grass there would be a little bell, and the bell would ring, and the people in the watch house would be able to come and dig you up, hopefully, before you suffocated. That's one of the origins of the saying "saved by the bell." The other origin that I know of is there was a guard who fell asleep on sentry duty at Windsor Castle, and he said he could prove he wasn't asleep on duty because he heard Big Ben sound 13 chimes, and everybody kind of said that's impossible, Big Ben can never chime 13 chimes. But they got the best clock maker or whatever of the day to investigate, and they could work out that actually Big Ben had chimed 13 times instead of one time, and so he too was saved by the bell. All the way along the right you'll see St Bartholomew's Hospital, and one of the things, another good saying that you get from around here, people would dig up bodies from these churches, and they take them here to have tests and the autopsy so that the doctors could work out how our bodies work to improve medicine. But it was very blasphemous at the time.
Also to stop body snatchers stealing bodies.
Yeah. So what they would do, there used to be a number of pubs along here where the Stag's Head was. That was a pub up there, and so people would take the bodies up, and they'd be going off to the hospital to make a bit of money selling the bodies to people to dissect them. And if a watchman came, the version of the police came along, you'd run into the safe house and you kind of dump the body in a big wardrobe, and the police would come in and say, what you're doing, it's a bit suspicious, and you'd act all casual. And if the body fell out, of course, that's you'd be caught and you'd be arrested and executed, because it was a capital offence. And that's where you get the saying, a skeleton in the cupboard or a skeleton in the closet.
Now, who's this boy here?
So this corner here, in this side of London, this marks the outer limit of the reach of the Great Fire of London. So everything on this side towards the river and towards the Tower of London was all destroyed by fire, and everything beyond this bit was saved. And everyone knows that the Great Fire was started in Pudding Lane, and originally this used to be called Pie Lane. And the people back then were a bit superstitious, and they wondered if there was a connection between the fire starting and ending in places beginning with food in their names. So they decided it must be a curse from God, or a punishment from God. So they put a statue of a fat baby up there, and it's meant to remind everybody in London not to be too gluttonous, not to eat or drink too much or worship money, otherwise God will destroy us all with a coronavirus or something like that. And the building's new, but they've kept the statue in the original place. Well, actually, they were renovating the street 6 or 7 years ago, and they found those street levels underneath, I think, from Roman or Viking times. Anybody who watches BBC Sherlock TV show will recognise this building, as this is where Benedict Cumberbatch jumps off to his apparent demise. And they picked this area because it's a dead-end street. So they aren't generally allowed to close off streets for TV shows, or they can't afford to do it. So by filming it from the end, you get this big wide expanse, and you're not going to be run over by taxi drivers and buses everywhere.
I believe this building was very important in covering up the fact he was still alive.
Are you a Sherlock fan, are you?
I am.
But yeah, this is St Bart's Hospital. This is possibly the oldest hospital in the Western world, and it was founded by a courtier of King Henry II, I think it was. He was on his way to the Holy Land, and he fell terribly ill, and while he was kind of delirious, he encountered St Bartholomew, or at least a vision of St Bartholomew, and he promised the saint that if he would ever return back to London alive and well, then he would repay God's kind of gratitude to him, and he would create churches and to heal people mentally and spiritually, and he'd build a hospital to heal people medically, and this is what it is. And it's now you can see one of the churches inside. It's one of the few hospitals that has its own ancient church. Can you see the steeple? We might be able to go through. It used to have 4 churches on the interior, but that's now the only one that's inside. But it looks very old-fashioned when you go in. And if you have a look at the top on this statue, this is the only public statue of King Henry VIII in London, unless anybody can tell me otherwise. I've never seen one. But this entrance is a Henry entrance. He did it as one of his kind of works of kindness to the public, to put him in the good books of everybody. So obviously he had to have his statue above it to show who he was the man. So I don't know if we can have a quick look in. Yeah. You can see it's a beautiful old church. I think that's the Queen Alexandra Garden, he says, with his new secret Sacred Gardens of London book coming out in September. Isn't it beautiful? You probably shouldn't go in, but you can put it to the door. It's very simple.
Beautiful.
So this is St Bartholomew the Less, and later on we'll see St Bartholomew the Great. there's a beautiful quote, it's hard to read on the phone, all about the hospital and how healing with God's love.
Very apt at the moment.
It is. I was actually here just 6 months ago because I got pushed under a tube train.
Oh my goodness.
And I used my guiding skills to pick the hospital that was least likely to have COVID people around, and I was right. And you got this beautiful central courtyard. You'd never know it was in the middle of the hospital. Normally there's a beautiful fountain running. I don't know why they haven't got it going. It's incredible to think this hospital was is 898 years old. I think it's 900 years in 2023. But it shows that old values of they try to make it nice for with fresh air and whatever. In the old days, you'd have the hospitals near London. People would actually sit on the banks of the River Thames to get their recuperation. One of the wings of this hospital has also got the most fantastic work of art. It looks like something you'd see in Blenheim Palace or Hampton Court, but I've never gone in to find it yet, and I don't think I'm going to go while the virus is on the rampage. But it's a huge hospital. You wouldn't know it was a hospital, really, would you?
No.
You see the war memorials for the First World War. For anybody watching it overseas, the First World War is generally more important in Britain than the Second World War, and like America, just down to the amount of people who died.
Remember the poor?
I think that does.
Yeah.
And it's still a functional church. You don't have to be in hospital to come here. You can go to one of the services. You can see how over the 1,000 years or so all the windows have been bricked up or the arches have moved. Just look rather like something you might see in the Holy Land, doesn't it? We're coming up to maybe my favourite part of this walk. If you don't like gore, look away now. So we'll turn right. So this is West Smithfield. And this whole place originally, actually, this was once for kind of a market for animals. But in the old days it was for jousting and things like that. And this is right on the edge of the city of London. So the people, everybody imagines people in the old days were a bit stupid or didn't know what's going on. But you'll see that the hospital here is right on the city wall. They weren't stupid. They didn't want, if you had the plague or some horrible disease, to be treated in the heart of the city. You were pretty much right on the city limits. And then if you died or there was a terrible virus, you'd be able to be either buried outside or kept away from the majority of the population. But this is called Smithfield in the old days, but for centuries it was a meat area, and it was also in August, as we're in August now, it was part of the Bartholomew Fair, and it was 14 days of acting and boxing and puppets and whatever. But as most things in London, it would get out of hand and there would be lots of drinking and debauchery or whatever, and in the end they limited it to 4 days, and then after another century or two the Victorians banned it because they thought it was nobody was getting anything good out of it. And if you have a look on the wall here, you'll see all these holes, and everybody knows of course that London was bombed in the Blitz. But these holes are from a Zeppelin from the First World War, and the Zeppelin went on a bombing run all the way from Bloomsbury, all the way past St Paul's and along here, and they destroyed several houses in this part of London. And this is just the remnants of the shrapnel that's embedded in the wall, and because it's the NHS, they're not going to spend their money on getting rid of history, so it's here forevermore. Some of them are really big. And you can read the logbook of the captain of the Zeppelin, and he said that they would drop the bombs overboard, and there were big heavy bombs like 200 kilos or about 350 pounds, and he would say that entire streets would just go dark or disappear from his bombs. It was such a horrifying thing. And of course the Royal Flying Corps couldn't find it because there was no radar, and even though you can see a big Zeppelin in the sky, if the Zeppelin's 10,000 feet up and your plane's 2,000 feet, you might never see it. But you can just see, it gives you a bit of an indication. There's all sorts to see around here. Ooh, this is where Rose does her best Mel Gibson impression. So, this is where William Wallace, Braveheart, was executed. Normally, of course, people of any seniority would be executed in the Tower of London, and it was a deliberate decision to have him executed here because the king didn't recognise him as being a nobleman. He saw himself as a Scottish patriot and a nobleman in Scotland, but of course to London he was just a rebel and not worthy of the respect of being executed in the Tower of London. So he was brought here, and if you remember in the film, Edward Longshanks, he had some sort of pneumonia, a very bad cough, and he was coughing away, and he was actually in this hospital. And Braveheart was hung, drawn and quartered. So for those of you that don't know, you're hung by the neck, but not until you're dead. Then you put on a table or a cart, and then they cut you open from your neck down to the top of your legs, he says diplomatically, and then they rip you open, and the people who did it were very skilled. If they wanted to, they could kill you in seconds, and the idea was that they would make you repent or beg for forgiveness, and once you'd begged, then they would kill you. But of course, as you saw in the film, William and lots of other people wouldn't beg. They'd go down like a man, so to speak. But it could be very protected, and it could take hours, and they would pull your intestines out, and you could see them, and then they'd set fire to them, so you'd feel the pain of it while you were all bleeding and you'd already been hung. And then when finally you'd had enough, or they'd run out of bits to pull out of you, you'd be quartered, and you'd either they'd cut your bits off, or horses or whatever would pull you limb from limb, and then your head would be taken to the spike at London Bridge, and your other body parts would be taken to the four corners of the kingdom, either bits of London as a warning not to misbehave, or they take you to your home city, or so you might go to Edinburgh or York or Kent or wherever the problems were. And of course one of the things that would happen here, this being a meat area, even though it was highly illegal, sometimes to make a bit of extra money, the people who had to get rid of the bodies one way or the other, they didn't really care what. They'd give the bodies away to be butchered. And even though the story of Sweeney Todd is a fictional story, it's based on accounts that actually happened, and this is the sort of place that would happen. The poorer people of London couldn't afford to have beef and pork and chicken, and so if you had a bit of human mixed up with some carrot and parsnip and gravy, nobody's going to ask any questions, and you'd only get caught if somebody actually caught you in the act. But you'll see lots of the pubs around here are called like the Butcher's Hook and Cleaver, so it's all to go with the meat trade and executions and horrible things. So here, this place has been home of executions for ages and ages. These are interesting people. So if you can have a look at the names here, these were all Protestant or Church of England Anglican bishops, and they were all executed for not converting their faith back to being Roman Catholic, and they were burnt at the stake. And originally, until about 2 years ago, there was a circular paving set here, but they've done a lot of building work, and I think that's where they were burnt alive. And they were burnt by Queen Mary, Bloody Mary, who of course wanted to make everybody Catholic, and this is just that they wouldn't convert or repent, and so they were burnt alive. Now here's another good memorial. This is a memorial to the Peasants' Revolt, and if you have a look on one side of the memorial, you see they've all got agricultural tools. You've got scythes and hoes and pitchforks, and then on the right hand side you've got military weapons from the medieval period. And the Peasants' Revolt was led by a man called Wat Tyler, but he was really inspired by a man called John Ball. Is he mentioned on here? Yes. Yes, I haven't been since February, but I'm sure he was. John Ball was a religious man, and he had a very catchy phrase, which I remember my grandma telling me, maybe when I was misbehaving, and it was, when Adam delved, meaning working the fields, and Eve span, meaning she was working, making clothes, who was then the gentleman? So the idea is that in the Bible, everybody from Adam and Eve had to work for a living. There was no aristocrats or lords or ladies or queens. So if Adam and Eve had to work for a living and the peasants had to work for a living, what exactly is the monarchy and the rich people doing in this whole equation? And John Ball was such an inspirational speaker that he inspired people with what Tyler, and they stormed London, and they actually forced the king to come to a signing here, and they were hoping for something like nominal democracy or equality. So they were going to have a big peace signing ceremony here, but it's unclear what has actually happened. But there was a bit of a rabble rousing, and either some of Watts people got drunk, or some of the king's sheriffs were deliberately provocative, but a little kind of hoo-ha started, and Wat Tyler got stabbed in the side by one of the king's men, and he actually went into St Bart's Hospital, and an hour or so later he was found, and he was pulled out, and he was hung, drawn and quartered and executed here as well, and that was the end of the peasants' revolt. But it's one of the most important bits towards civil rights and democracy, like the Magna Carta and the American Declaration of Independence and the French Revolution. And the peasants only really got going after the plague, because after there were so many peasants died, up to 60% of London died, and the peasants managed to realise that they had a value, and if the lord of the manor didn't treat them well, who was going to plant the food, who was going to grow the crops? In the old days, if they did anything, they could be executed, and there'd be another peasant. But when half the peasants are dead, it manages to re-establish how the work is done a little bit, maybe like how life is changing now with the coronavirus, and all of a sudden something happens and life's never the same again. And it's said that the Queen stayed in this window and she watched the men being burnt alive pretty much where you're standing. And we'll go through here. This was once the gatehouse of the priory when before King Henry VIII. See, this is St Bartholomew the Great, founded 1123, so it was founded the same time as St Bart's Hospital, nearly 900 years ago. It's a very kind of atmospheric building. Somebody lives in here. A year or so ago I had a tourist who did one of his silly American attention-grabbing selfie poses by the front door, and at exactly the wrong time the man came out with his kind of shopping, and it was all very embarrassing. It used to be a school at one point in the 70s or 80s, and this is St Bartholomew the Great's church. There's another memorial to William Wallace. I'm actually related to Robert the Bruce.
Oh, are you really?
Yes, but you can see it's all got various stages of construction, because the building itself was altered a lot when the monastery was dissolved. But this is the oldest church that escaped the Great Fire of London in this side of London, and inside it looks almost like a Roman temple inside. They often film it inside to stand in for St Paul's, because St Paul's is so expensive and a lot of the film companies can't or they won't filming there. They film the outside of St Paul's, and then the inside is so antique looking that they film it inside, and everybody presumes that the action or the conversations are in St Paul's, but it's actually still in here. They do a very famous Christmas midnight mass on Christmas Eve. I think it's all in Latin. But it gives you also an idea, how I said earlier, how London was a collection of villages, and you can see all the little old houses. You'd have no idea you were in London. You really could be in the middle of a county somewhere.
Very cool building.
And if you have a look here, you'll see that the wall, this is the cemetery, or the old cemetery, you'll see how the land level of the cemetery is higher than the footpath, and it's higher than the road. They had so many people here, they actually were kind of almost jumping on them to fit them in, the walls, to retain the wall, to stop the people coming out. Have you ever been here before, Rose?
No.
You can see there's nobody around. It's not much different if you come when there's no virus. That's why I like doing my tours to unvisited parts of London. Everybody else goes to Buckingham Palace and Big Ben, and I do those places as well, but I prefer going when nobody else goes. For a moment I thought they'd locked the gate and we were marooned. So this street, I think this is called Cloth Fair, And like in other parts of London, all the street names all relate to the industry that used to happen here. If you turn right, that'll take you back to the Barbican. We've just come out of the sun a little bit. And this house here, even though it looks renovated, this is the most oldest residential house in the City of London. And it'll be impossible, I guess, to see on the phone, although you might be able to see. Up on the first floor, see where the lamp is? That window there, because it's the oldest house, in Victorian times and early 20th century, people would come and scrape their name, etch it with like a razor blade or knife. And I've had a tourist come with a telephoto lens, and you can clearly see people like Winston Churchill and the Queen Mother, and I think the Duke of Wellington. It's all back to front. But if you come in the morning at September or March, when the sun is at a different angle, you can actually see the signatures glinting at a very kind of microscopic level. So take a photo, and then you can come back. I've seen about 10 people I recognise.
I'll have to take a photo of that. I can't see anything now. I think the sun's in the way.
Yeah, you really need the sun to be shining along so it glints. But it's a beautiful church inside. It's one of the only churches, sadly, that you have to pay to go in. There's a section for it if you're going to go and pray normally, and they do have Sunday services and weekday services, but to just go in, it's one of the few churches you have to pay because it's been in so many television and film productions. This street, as old as it is actually greatly modernised. It was a real slum in Victorian days, and it was all like this. You got the old blue plate there for the famous poet. Yes. You see how they've all got names to do with markets and agriculture. There's one lane down here, it's actually got gravestones. It's in a place called Back Passage, and there was a time when the street sign was always being stolen because of the name of the name of the street.
I'm surprised nobody steals Cock Street.
Yeah. I got 4 in my bedroom. What we can do, we'll just cross over there a moment. Here's another one of the little city parks. This is now a very good secret car park if you ever want to park in the City of London and always get a space. This is a place to come to. So over on the right, we'll go through it in a minute, that is Smithfield's meat market, and because of this area has got all its history of debauchery and good times, this is also, in the Victorian times, it was very expensive to get a divorce. So a man could divorce a wife for lots of reasons. He didn't have a problem getting a reason, but actually doing it was a bit of a problem. So what you'd do, you'd come here and do a kind of a permanent wife swap. And if you wanted to get rid of your wife, you'd come here and you'd meet another man who also wanted to get rid of his wife. And that is where you get the term meat market from when you go clubbing or to discos, because you go to the meat market and you try and pick up a lady. And over here, can you see the statue? I think she's the goddess of fidelity. And this statue was made by a sculptor before he knew where it was going to be situated. And when he found out that it was going to be right next to here with all the kind of terrible things going on, he was outraged because he was a very devout Christian and he didn't want fidelity to be kind of looked on as a sleazy woman. So he came back and he put a gold wedding ring on her finger, and depending on the sun, it's hard to see or not, but he made sure that she was a married woman and she was of respectable status. Again, I think it's easy to see in the morning. And it is small, but it's kind of welded to where her arm kind of joins.
I'd have to go around the thing.
Yeah, and even then you might not see it. And everybody will say, Stephen's talking nonsense.
Oh no, you can see it.
Oh, you can, yeah. And it's been there for 130 odd years and I'm not encouraging anyone to take it. But it's quite incredible, isn't it? So what we'll do now, we'll head through Smithfield's meat market. It's hard to imagine that 800 years ago people would be jousting here, isn't there? So we were just outside the city walls. One of the reasons that executions happened here was it was easy to get rid of the bodies, not just for the meat, which was later, but at that time you'd have wolves and bears and things, so they literally throw you over the city wall and they just let the wildlife take care of the burial situation. So this is Smithfield's market, and this is the last surviving Victorian massive market. You used to have the fish market down by the river, and of course Covent Garden for the fruit market. And they just announced 2 or 3 months ago that the market's going to close down and move out of London to modern facilities. This is going to be taken over by the Museum of London, where we saw John Wesley meet the Holy Spirit earlier. In the days before Tony Blair, when you had drinking times, the pubs around here were famous because the meat trade, it still happens through the night. If you come here at 6 in the morning, it's full of butchers and there's bloody gory things on the floor. But in the old days, when you had to go to the pub and finish by 10:30 or 11, the pubs here were given special dispensation to open in the morning. So all the people would work through the night, and at 7 they'd go to the pub for 2 or 3 hours, and it was quite a thing to do for people in the 90s of my sort of time. They go out clubbing and getting drunk, and then once everything had closed, they'd head to Smithfield for a little pick-me-up. It's a great architecture, isn't it? The Victorians were all into this. They gave lots of money to their kind of public works. Over here, you can see some of the things we were talking about. So you got the poor bishops who were being burnt alive at the stake. And there you got Smithfield. So there's Newgate. Do you remember the Viaduct Tavern was on the corner, and we walked down there? That's where the ruined church that the Luftwaffe destroyed. And the hospital, there's a church that we've just been looking at, St Bartholomew the Great. So we've just come here. And there's Charter House, which is about 5 minutes walk away. And Charter House has got possibly the biggest plague pit in Britain. They can get up to 100,000 people are buried in there. And while they were digging Crossrail, they actually went through the corner and they found some skeletons that have still got the plague DNA in them. You have to be a little bit careful because sometimes the plague is dormant and kind of in hibernation, and once it's exposed to oxygen and to temperature, it can become virulent again, so they always have to disappear in a big hurry. And I think here you can see just a meat market with the ladies. I think that's what it is. And then you got the meat fair, people selling horses and sheep and cows. Gives you an idea of how grand it used to be. And like the rest of London, this was bombed terribly in the Second World War, and Smithfield was hit by the second to last V2 rocket ever to hit London. And you can see the damage. We just walked through here, and it took until the 1960s, I think, till it was properly reopened. And this happened just a few weeks before the end of the Second World War. But it's nice and quiet now, but by the time it gets dark, it'll be in full go. If you come at 2 or 3 in the morning, it's like being in a factory. So we're leaving behind Little Britain and Smithfield.
Hello, I'm just going to quickly come on. I'm looking a bit hot and sweaty now. I'm definitely towards my 3 million miles for the 3 million
minutes to go, and we've left Smithfield, and now we're entering Farringdon. And it's again, you just go a short difference and you're in a totally different neighbourhood. It's got different style buildings. We cross over here, and of course originally all the cows and animals would be sent to the meat market. They would be walked. It would take several weeks for people to walk from the countryside, but later on, once the railways were invented, they would come on the trains from Farringdon station, and in fact even the market, I think, had an underground station. And you see lots of the streets here, like Cowcross Street. It all gives an indication of how what the old trades were. St John, that's because I do a tour on the Crusaders and Knights, And then you've got the Knights of St John, who are nearby in Clerkenwell, well, on the border between Clerkenwell and Farringdon.
Who were the Maltese knights?
The Knights of St John went to Malta, so they were always being evicted and kicked out by people. But for about 250 years, this was a really grotty place. It was full of drinks and drugs and prostitution and things of that nature. We'll go down there in a minute, but I'll just take you to the left slightly. And here's an interesting thing that you won't expect to see in the middle of grotty London. This street used to be twice or three times longer, but as you can right here, you can hear the underground trains.
Oh, yeah.
And the street was kind of cut short when they built the trains 160 odd years ago. Can you see, we were talking about something like this before we met. This is a Rubens painting about Samson and Delilah, and it's a copy of a painting that you'll see in the National Gallery. And the idea of it was, because this used to be a seedy area even in the 80s and 90s, they thought it was to prove the idea that if you take care of your environment, people will treat it with a bit more respect. So they put this print of a classic painting here in the hope, I suppose, that people would stop going to the toilet here or whatever amongst the bins after they've had a kebab too many. And that's why it's here. These are all kind of media studios where they do graphic arts and television. It's a very fashionable place to work now in Farringdon. I think I did one of my first jobs, I did something for the Horror Channel.
A lot of freelancers also part of the
Yes, a lot of theatre people and people in cafes and television production. We're going to go to the left, maybe if we go outside the scaffolding, otherwise we're going to impale each other. Aren't they beautiful buildings? Gives you an idea what all London was like before the Great Fire and before the Second World War. This place is normally heaving with people. Someone getting married in a taxi.
Aww.
So you've got Farringdon Station coming up, which is both an underground station and a mainline station, and this is how a lot of the animals would come to market. You can see all of these buildings would have, in Victorian times, have been great kind of factories and mills and what have you. I often feel sad when I'm walking around here and everybody's kind of bored looking at their computer screens, and me and the tourists are just kind of out having fun. You see the age of the pubs give you an indication of how long this street has kind of been up on the go. The pub that we came to really, and where we'll finish for today, is this pub here, the Castle at Farringdon. And can you have a look on the pub sign? You'll see it's got 3 balls underneath the sign, and that's the sign of the pawnbrokers. And this pub is the only pub in Britain which is also a legalised pawnbroker. So technically, if you run out of money, you can give them your iPad or whatever, and they'll give you some money back. And the reason that this is here is that in the King George IV they used to have a lot of cockerel fighting round the back, and people would bet on the cocks and they'd peck each other to death, and then the winner would get the money. And there was a portly old man who came along here, and he didn't have any money to bet on, so the barman, not recognising him, he said he couldn't lend him any money, so the man said, "I'll give you my gold watch, and then that'll cover me for my afternoon of fun." So the man got some money in return for his watch, and he spent the day gambling on the cockerel fighting, and then he went away. And a few days later, a messenger came from the palace, and it turned out that the old chap was King George IV, and he'd been out walking, having a good time. And not only did he give them the money and everything, but he gave them a license to be a pawnbroker. And you can see the 3 balls to indicate fairness and trade, and they're still a pawnbrokers today. So that's pretty much the end of the tour. We might do some more like this if anybody liked it. If you got any other questions, if you leave them online, and then when I get back home in 2 hours or so, then I'll do my best to answer them. But I hope you've enjoyed this. It's the first time I've been in London proper since the 6th of February, so that's why I might be a little bit rusty. But apart from that, it was nice to see you all, and take care, and I'll see you again one day, hopefully. And do follow my blog if you like, www.stephenliddell.co.uk, or Ye Olde England Tours has its own website, and we've got 700 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor and Viator and Get Your Guide and things. So.
Okay, so just to let you know that Stephen is offering 50% off any of his tours if you wanted to go on a socially distant tour of London like I have today. Again, or you could donate if you enjoyed this tour. You can donate, I think it was pay what you want, I think was the phrase we used. And there is a link to donate, and I'll add another in the comments as well. So if you want to donate to this fund, it's obviously to support Stephen, to support local businesses, but also kind of to support those people who've been excluded. 3 million people in the UK who've been excluded from any financial help. A lot of people, when I speak to them, they're a little bit confused, like, oh, didn't you receive furlough or a self-employment grant? And for various reasons, 3 million people were excluded from any of that. So they've been pretty much surviving on zero income since March, including Stephen and including myself. But the purpose of today is really to raise awareness of that, but also to raise funds towards the Samaritans Mind the Gaps campaign as well. So 20% of any donations that you make will go straight to the Mind the Gaps campaign. So on that note, I'd like to thank you. Again, we're still quite socially distanced, so thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you have a very nice evening. Bye.
Thank you.